this computer. All right, now welcome to Literally Alive, brought to you by Littoral Books, Maine's independent publisher of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction books based in Portland, Maine. Visit literalbooks.com to purchase titles such as Soft Features by Jillian Barnes, Small Off Things by Susan Farrell Smith, Elegiaca Americana by Claire Milliken, and the hot off the press new title, You Are Ruining My Loneliness by Kate Kearns. And the star of tonight's program, of course, is A Dangerous New World, Maine Voices on the Climate Crisis. I am Robert Diamante. I will be your host tonight. When A Dangerous New World was published, 65 writers and 27 artists responded to a call for essays, poetry, and artwork on the effects of climate change on their lives, their communities, and their families, and their futures. What Coalesced was a publication that has been collected by the Maine Historical Society, the Maine State Library, Portland Public Library, Maine Writers Collective, Bowdoin College Library, Colby, Witherie, Curtis Memorial Library, Merrill, Cliff Island, Bangor, Cape Elizabeth, Belfast, Maine College of Art, University of Maine. It's been used by reading groups, by the Maine Humanities Council. It's carried such venues as the Nature Conservancy and the Portland Museum of Art. It has become one of the most important publications, in my opinion, in Littoral Books library. And I don't mind sharing the opinion that is among the most important books on climate that has been published in the state of Maine. That's my cat, and he agrees. Tonight, we will visit with some of the artists to discover what they have been up to since its publication. First up is Kathleen Sullivan, who was the co-editor of the original publication. Kathleen has had a long career as a clinical social worker. She has shifted her focus from individuals and couples to working with the community to change behaviors which affect the health and safety of life on our planet. She founded Freeport Can, a grassroots climate organization, and is currently its coordinator. She has an MFA from Stone Coast, was co-editor of DNW, writes a Substack column called Code Red and Me, Rethinking Everything. Kathleen, what have you been up to since the publication of Dangerous New World?
Well, I guess you just heard what I've been up to. I didn't realize how much I'd put in that bio. First, I want to thank Littoral Books for having the courage in the very beginning, back in 2019, to publish this book. We went to them on, Megan and I had never edited a thing before, and we went to them with the idea, and within 2 minutes they said yes. And within 6 months, 7 months, the book was published. And I think you can all agree it's a beautiful book. And I'm thrilled to hear all that you've just said about how it's gotten so much recognition in the state. And I thank all the writers and artists who are here with us, and there are other ones who contributed. It was really an amazing thing to put together. So I've been, as I said, as you said, I've switched very much to doing organizing work, and I can talk about that later. And that's really, I feel called. That's what I want to say. I feel called to this work.
I'm so looking forward to the larger conversation that will ensue after I've invited or introduced everybody. So thank you for that.
Yes.
I'm excited to hear what more is cooking. Kara Douglas is a yoga and meditation teacher who lives in Hartswell, Maine, with her family, where they explore miles of coastline and local trails. As a poet, Kara seeks wilderness experiences that evoke human complexity and intimacy with our deeper abilities to observe and act. Her work is published in several anthologies, including Wait, Poems from the Pandemic, and A Dangerous New World, Maine Voices on the Climate Crisis, which is tonight's star, among others. Kara, welcome. What have you been up to?
I have continued to teach and write through the pandemic, publishing just a little bit here and there. And I've also spent a bit of time just focusing on advocacy for natural resources on a very local level, right within my own neighborhood, really.
Excellent.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to hearing more about that. Annalise Giacomides is a writer and mixed media artist who grew up in inner city Boston and raised a family on 40+ acres in northern Maine, growing almost all their food and pumping water by hand. In addition to working with inner city environmental justice organizations and international arts groups, she's discussed life through the lens of children's literature in a variety of settings, including prisons and community centers. She's published hundreds of personal essays and monthly arts features about many of Maine's creatives. Cited in national competitions and nominated for a Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net, her poetry and prose have been broadcast on Maine Public and NPR and included in many journals, magazines, and anthologies, most recently Breaking Bread, the winner of a 2023 Maine Literary Award. Her work has been included in 3 of Littoral Books anthologies. More is forthcoming in Maintenance, Poems from Here, and Water Wheel Review, among others. Annalise, you're also my neighbor in Bangor.
Thank you, Robert. So I just think this gathering of a portion of the tribe is a fabulous venue for all of us. In terms of climate awareness, I would say that I have continued to speak about A Dangerous New World's extraordinary and moving vision anywhere I can, because as Robert said earlier, it is, in my opinion, the best book out there that tells this story in terms of the personal, in a language or languages with multiple voices that speak to a broad audience. And it also recognizes how both the visual and the literary work together. That was an amazing combination in this absolutely extraordinary book. And I will say too that Kathleen Sullivan and I have gone on to do a few things together in terms of, we reached out to the Common Ground Country Fair, and last year we're able to put together a presentation there that focused a lot on climate change writing, the power of poetry, this particular anthology. And again, this year we're shaping another addressing climate and change and our responsibility and age and time and all of those factors that drive us right now. So,
we are so looking forward to hearing more about that as the show continues. Thank you, Annalise.
You're
That's
welcome.
wonderful. Marjorie Moore lived in Maine from 1970 to 1993. Throughout that period, was an active participant in the New England arts community. She exhibited frequently in both private and public institutions, including Baradoff Galleries, Davidson Gallery, the Uzersky Gallery in Boston, Bates Museum of Art, the Farnsworth, and a one-person exhibition at the Portland Museum of Art in 1991. In 1993, she relocated to Texas, first in Houston and then in Austin, spending at least part of her time every summer in Maine. While in Texas, she continued to pursue an active arts career, exhibiting in galleries and nonprofit institutions. In 2007, 2007, she returned to Maine and is now a permanent resident of Great Diamond Island and an active participant in the New England artist community, and maintains a studio in Portland on Munjoy Hill. Welcome, Marjorie.
Thank you.
Did I get that date right? I'm sorry.
I think we came back to Maine full-time in 2017, so 6 years ago about.
Okay, I had a zero in
Okay.
it. My apologies.
That's okay. So I've been making art, which I've all done forever. And the art has evolved in different ways, as with many artists. I've also become quite involved here on the island. We have a pretty active group that is dealing with the effects of sea rise. And there are many aspects of different people involved in different aspects of that, of addressing education, addressing what's happening with erosion, what is happening with the temperatures, on and on and on. So I would say that living out here has certainly made me incredibly aware of
the crisis that we are in, and involving myself with many different kinds of people some who actually, of course, are making their living from the sea, has been extremely informative. So I've started to look and gain knowledge just from my environment in a very different way.
That's wonderful. And I have Marjorie's website up, and I'm sure we'll have some time to do a screen share so we can look at some of that. So thank you, Marjorie. Jerry Theriault is the editor of Littoral Books anthology, Wait, Poems from the Pandemic. Her poetry collections include Raydost, My Red, in the Museum of Surrender, and Mother, Self-Portrait as Homestead, and it's forthcoming in June 2023. A Franco-American poet, Jerry grew up in Waterville and graduated from Colby College, later earning an MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts. Her teaching career spanned 34 years, 6 of them as an English department chair at the International School of Prague. Her poems and reviews appear in the Rumpus, the Texas Review, the Atlanta Review, Asheville Poetry Review, Plume, and many other publications. Her awards include the 2023 Maine Arts Commission Literary Arts Fellowship, the 2023 Monson Arts Fellowship, the 2022 Norwood Prize, New Ohio Review, and a 2019 Maine Literary Award. Jerry lives in South Portland with her husband, Phil Carlson, who's a welcome. Jerry, what have you been up to? A lot, clearly. Jerry?
Oh. There you go.
Did
Hi.
we lose her? Oh, sorry.
No, I'm here. I'm here. Thank you. Yeah, what have I been up to? Well, I've been writing. I'm always writing, so I've been writing. I also make art. I've been making art since 2007. And increasingly my art probably reflects most readily concerns with place, and because we live near the water. So I wanted to say that. I've edited the anthology on the pandemic, which was a great experience. And I'm just completing, well, I've completed and my new book will be published shortly. I've also done 2 rounds of writing the land. I know some other people in this group have done that as well. It's a program where poets are paired with land trusts and they write poems and create little videos, and there's a whole website dedicated to it. So that was very rewarding for me. So,
Can I ask who you were paired with? I mean, do you mind if I ask, or can you give out the information before it's published?
I was paired with Red Rose Preserve in Bowdoin.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
And then the second time I was paired with South Portland Land Trust.
Wonderful.
I was delighted with that because that's where I live.
Well, this is great. And I am so happy that all of you are here. And I am going to mute myself and turn off my video and turn the program over to you, but not before actually handing it back to Kathleen, who will kick it off. So welcome back, Kathleen.
All right. Kick it off, huh? It's football time. Thank you. So it's been 4 years, and I'd love to hear what people have been experiencing in the 4 years in terms of their own art, both writing and making art. When we first decided to edit this book and bring all the voices together, the idea was that people were not yet awake to the reality enough of climate change, that people were, there was a lot of denial. There was a lot of, oh, it's not real. It's going to take a long time before it's going to happen. What we know is that that's really changed over the last 4 years, that this percentage of people who understand that climate change is real is much higher. And that's no longer, we would no longer, I think, have to write a book to get people to acknowledge the reality of it. But since then, what we've needed to do is, I think, is to find language for something which has never happened to mankind, which is the kind of existential threat to all of life that's happening at this moment. And that has never been languaged, nor have we ever had to imagine that in the kind of time frame we have now. And I think that presents enormous challenges for artists, both to find language for it, as well as to find a way, if you are staying with it and finding language for it, how do you tolerate the reality of that, the feelings about that, the grief about that, the fear about that, the horror about that. So I'm interested in the artist's process of processing what we're processing, and would love to hear all of you talk about that a little bit. I mean, I could briefly say that for me, what I did was decide to write a Substack column, and I write it once a week. I don't write it in the summer because I like to garden, but in the winter, as soon as it gets dark, I write a weekly Substack column because I need to be able to sit down and process what's happening. And I need witnesses for it, and I need to be connected to people. And it's been the most important thing that I have done artistically, is that Substack column. It's really amazing. I've met people all over the country. And I urge everybody to do one. But that's been the way I've dealt with my own loneliness about it, or isolate. You know, I wanted someone to meet my own thoughts about what was going on. So that's all I'll say. And I would love anybody else to, whatever comes up for you, to tell us about if you have some reactions to that.
I think I can say something. Yeah. I appreciate so much what you're saying. I think in my everyday work, I'll call it, I think I kind of go the opposite direction. In other words, I'm working with materials that have to do with what is at stake out there. But in terms of the artistic process, I think I don't want to use, well, I guess I will. I'll use the word avoidance, because I find that if I can concentrate on a piece of work and put myself into it in its entirety, I feel that at some level, someone is going to look at that and see something. So it's very difficult for me to present my work as just about climate change. I think it's about something even more soulful in the sense of humanity. So maybe that does relate. I'm kind of going all over the place here, but I just think that sometimes if we can look at the minuscule, which is what I tend to do, like I'll take a piece of seaweed, for example, and share that and draw that or work with that. And I feel like then that translation somehow is going to say something to someone about a vision of what's out there. So I always afraid, especially living out here, of preaching to people, because we still do have plenty of deniers out here, I can assure you, especially people who just come in the summer who want the place to remain pretty and not really deal with the reality of what is happening. So I'm hoping that by presenting works that show the beauty and the importance of the natural materials, that something will be addressed. So I'll let somebody go from here.
I would offer that I've been thinking and writing and paying attention to climate change since I was about 9. It's just the juxtaposition I've always had in this world. And the work that I have done going forward, what I've learned from this over the long trajectory of time is basically that when we focus on the really difficult realities of climate change, which are real, as we all know, and which are a problem that needs to be addressed, if our focus stops there, the brain's negativity bias takes over, and it really creates a spiral of there's nothing we can do about it, so let's give up. It creates a sense of frustration and complacency. And so I find that it really helpful, first of all, I guess, to go back to part of Kathleen's question, I have to tolerate this because I'm raising children in this world. And if I can't tolerate it, how will they? And it's not tolerating what's happening as if advocating for it, but rather tolerating the fact that this is real and this is hard, and we need to dig deep and we need to work collectively to find a way forward, which I fully believe that we can do. And if I can't set that example for my daughters, then who will? So when I'm working with the concept of climate change or natural resource preservation, and I'm putting that into words and I'm putting it into images and by and large putting it into my teaching, we need to be able to reference what are the small things that are going really well, and what's happening in our bodies that's keeping us alive moment to moment, what's already working well, what can we find that's happening in this world to counter that negativity bias, not because it cancels out the terrible things that are happening, but rather because it's a both and. And if we don't have those islands of connectivity and openness and hope to be able to stay tethered to, then it becomes very possible for us to get lost in that sense of complacency and just really lose ourselves and not know where to go next.
I think of that in terms, Kara, of we cannot allow the distressing and depressing present to determine our future. Mm-hmm. That's normally how I work through that. I have been accused in my life of being a bit of a Pollyanna, so that I can put a positive spin on many things that I've experienced, that the world experiences. But I will say that I want to bring this back to a little bit that I said in the beginning when Robert was talking about words and images. As far as change for me, increasingly in these last years, words rise in conjunction with images, and images with words. And this is brand new to me since A Dangerous New World. I can't tell you that it's because of the presentation in that book or not, but I'm acutely aware of how loss and change, both of humans, because I've lost a fair number in this cycle of time, and the planet are altering even the way I work. So lots of times for me, when I have no idea where I'm going. I don't know how everybody else works. Some people work under structure, but I definitely do not. So I had sent Robert, a couple of images, but I don't think those are pull upable right now. So I'm just going to flash one on the screen. This is an image, if it even kind of shows there for you. This is an image. Does that show at all? There you go. Yes. This is an image that came about as directly as a result of what I wrote for A Dangerous New World. That's when the whole cycle started to shift for me. And so just to start to spin this into words a little bit, I'm going to go here because I think all of us who are writers here have something to read. So we'll make sure that gets to be part of our presentation here. So this particular artwork is titled from the piece that was a prose poem that was in A Dangerous New World, which starts like this. Our waters have all gone on a walkabout, not of their own volition, like a stroll. No intention here. What else could they do? We've been punching holes in the skin of this rudderless boat since we first formed a fist, made the tool, sharpened the tip. So what has happened for me is, if you couldn't probably see it in the illustration when you could see it right then because it's not in front of you. But what has also been happening is there are figures that come up in all of my, I'm not a figurative painter. I don't intentionally put them there. I don't even know they're there for the longest time. And then there they are. So this has been part of the whole shift in how I make. And so in terms of the Pollyanna thing, I'll read one more thing that is just a brief outtake from a bigger poem called Her Story with a character called She, and it'll come out in Water Wheel Review this fall. This is where the Pollyanna kind of shows up, but I think we need to latch on to that sense that there is joy and hope. She never saw climbing to the top as a goal. It was always about the climbing and the light along the way. In these times, she knew there was much to be purposeful about, much to pull us away from our self-focused lens and turn our heart to the collective for the sheer rightness of it all. She was climbing for joy. Isn't that always the story, whether we know it or not? Caught in the shallows and wobbles, buried and breathing. So as you can see, Robert's put that up on a screen there. As you can see, there's a little figure in the top one inside the little house, and in the bottom one, is a little figure off to the side, none of which were created. So I think that, you know, it may be possible that we're all changed in such a way that we make differently, that we see our words differently, we see our images differently, and we just make differently. So I find that an interesting thing for people to address also as we talk. So thanks so much. I'm very moved to be in the company of all five of us. So I appreciate your being here.
And I'll step up now. And you know, I don't consider myself an activist. I'm very aware of what's going on, and I make art sometimes about it, and I do write about it, but I don't consider myself an activist. I write about people, though, most specifically my people, my own history, my predecessors, and my heritage, I guess, is what you'd say. And in my newest project, I've been writing about cemeteries. And here's the funny thing. I mean, it's hard to go too far down any path without coming up against climate change. And what has happened is I've started to write about cemeteries, which started as walking through the cemetery and there's a story on the headstone. Imagine it. And that morphed into doing more genealogy and starting to write about my own heritage. And, you know, one of the things, and I'm going to read a poem about this, is the way we do funerals, which is very much related to climate and our use of the earth, you know, digging the earth and putting bodies in these vaults and caskets and closing them away from the earth, really. And so I'm very interested in green funerals, which are starting to be a thing. So that's a small piece of something that has very much interested me. And I suppose I could read a poem now. Is that all right? I have two poems. Yeah. I'll read one. They're both about turtles. This one is called Landscape with Turtle, and it addresses the whole issue of green burial or traditional burial. I find a box turtle's bottom shell, one edge jagged like tiny teeth, the other curved amid stones in the dried up riverbed. My mother loved such leavings, shells, feathers, the peaty scent of earth, so close to human, this leftover matter, this humus. If I could, I'd bury her again among tree roots, her slow good rot, the weft to vixen crow turtle warp, all binding, all becoming earth.
I guess, Kathleen, I would throw out a question to you. In terms of your Substack column, you're connecting with people, and how has that connection, that immediate connection with people, changed you or helped shape your trajectory going forward? Is that audience important?
You know, it's fascinating how that audience is so real and immediate. It's different than writing a poem and then submitting it. And then, 6 months later, you hear it's been accepted, and like 6 months later it gets published, or even it's immediate. You write something and you're in it. And that very next day, you have people responding to what you have written. So it's a whole new way, I think, of being a writer. I don't know if any of you know Jason Anthony. He's also writes. He's from Maine. He's a poet and a scientist, and he also writes a Substack column, a weekly Substack column. It's gorgeous Substack column about climate change. It's called the something Anthropocene. I'll remember it in a minute. And he has that same experience, that you bring somebody else was talking about how important it was, I think, Kara, to have a sense of connectedness. And there's this enormous sense of connectedness by doing that kind of writing that I think is different it was different from the experience of the book, completely different from the experience of the book.
Kathleen, can you put that, excuse me for interrupting, would you be able to put the address? I'm assuming it's online, right?
Yes, it's online. Sure, I'd be
Would you
glad
put
to.
the address in the chat? Could you type it into the chat, please? If
Sure.
you'd like to invite people to read it.
Sure, I'd love to. I'm not, as I said, you won't get one this Sunday morning, because I don't do it when it's beautiful. And the thing that I wrestle with most is what somebody else was talking about, how not to be judgmental, how not to sound moralistic and judgmental. So you have to acquire a really different kind of voice. It's a very personal voice, and it's an I voice, because otherwise people are not going to read it, and you're going to sound like you're lecturing, and you're going to make everybody feel guilty. So that's another really difficult thing for a writer, I think, of kind of line to walk, is how not to make people feel guilty. I wrote about the fact that I wasn't going to fly to somewhere. I wasn't going to go to Paris this April. And everybody wrote back to me and said, you should go to Paris. If you don't eat meat for a year, you might save enough carbon that you could go to Paris. There was, I could see everybody who's flying felt terribly guilty about the fact that I wasn't going to fly. Of course, I did end up flying, but that's a whole other story. So does that answer your question, Annalise?
Yes. Yeah.
And I wonder about your own sense of connected, or other people's, that's a great question, sense of connection from the work that they're doing.
I tend to work in a very solitary way.
Yeah.
So, and how I work in terms of that is really no different. I don't have an audience. I don't feel, but I feel like I'm in the belly of an audience the entire time I'm making. So for me, it's not a direct feedback. I don't know how anybody else is in terms of their own work. I mean, I also don't see myself, as Jerry was saying, as an activist. I do activist things that sort of feel that way as a result of how I choose to live my life. I think that comes from all those decades on a dirt road, growing everything that we ate short of the whole wheat berries. But I ground the whole wheat berries to make the flour to make the bread. So yeah, I just feel like I show up and I live the best I can. I talk the best I can. I communicate the best I can over all of these topics. And it's the best I can do. And I wonder how everybody else feels about that.
I would agree with that. I think that lifestyle decisions have a great deal to do with how you present yourself to the world. And those choices are important. And as a mother and a grandmother, I feel that it's incredibly important to have passed on those values to my offspring and my grandchildren. And I think I have. And I see that in my grandchildren who are now mostly college age and the things that they're doing. And there's the hope for me, because they are so actively engaged in their understanding of what's going on in the world that they don't have to be taught that anymore. They know what's going on. So their conscious decisions, I feel like I'm part of that. And I find that extremely hopeful.
I find that as artists and writers, one of the things that is most important for us to do is to be listeners. And that's listening to the environment around us and understanding what filters through that perception that we can communicate. But it also is really important, I find, to listen to the people who may not share the same perspective and how they might present that and what their values are. Because when we have that common ground, when we have that foundation of being able to see each other as real and human and fallible, every one of us, then the conversation shifts and it becomes less about presenting a point of view and more about that interpersonal exchange where both parties or all parties are able to grow. And I think that communicates through, everyone loves something about this world. And being able to share that perspective, I think, is what deepens our ability to work together and create the change that needs to happen.
I agree with you, and I think all of you in one way or another have talked about in your work, you're working with things that are very tiny and you're showing how intricately beautiful they are. That the communication is about beauty or it's about love. And, to be able to share a beautiful piece of artwork or a poem about a cormorant of wings, as some of you have written, is by just making the depth of the beauty of this universe and the sense of connection to it through language without ever even really having to talk about climate change is an important gift.
Kathleen, you wrote in one of your pieces that's published in the book, the end of everything I've come to know as beauty and everything that has brought me solace and wonder and the succor of food and shelter and the air I breathe. And I think when we're able to communicate what it is that we love and what it is that provides that deep vitality for us to continue to move forward, and the fear and grief around loss of those things, I think everyone can connect with that on some level. Yes. It doesn't matter so much whether my values match with someone else's values. There's still something about being here that we really love and connect to, and we don't want to lose. And we share common ground in those spaces.
And a lot of that is also in the small details. Just the details of a life, the smallest little things become powerful communicators as we try and cross those divides, or what might feel like as a divide. But it's actually just showing up as a human to a human, paying attention to those small things we have in common. Does anybody have anything that they really want to make sure they get to read in this hour that we have? I think it's important that we get to be able to do that also in this way of communicating to people where we're at and what we've been doing. Carrie, did you have anything that you wanted to read?
I could share a piece. One of the publications that Can you hear me or not hear me?
Yes, yes.
You can, okay,
yes.
Thanks. I'm getting a funny message. One of the pieces that I have was also published in the Littoral Books anthology that Jerry worked with, Wait, Poems from the Pandemic, or Jerry edited. And it kind of talks a little bit about, it doesn't directly address climate change. It really addresses a moment that I shared with one of my daughters when this idea of living in a pandemic became a little bit overwhelming for her, and how the immediate thing that we both turned to was nature, just being outside and resetting ourselves in the world. So I can share that piece. This is called Night Walking. The long days of quarantine keep us cloistered. Quietly, you enter the room and stand beside the fire. When I ask how you're doing, you shrug and look down. The rain has stopped. Breaks in the clouds show slices of moonlight, so we put on our shoes and open the door. Peepers have just begun. Of all the things I worried about when I brought you into this world, a pandemic never made the list. There are some arcs that even our wildest wandering thoughts don't follow. What will your life be now, I wonder, as we cross the meadow and enter the night woods? What sharp angle will reset your course, my teenage girl on the doorstep of becoming, holding still as we all wait? You switch off your headlamp. Certain that we can find our way in the dark, you grasp my hand and step over downed branches. An owl sounds in the distance. We hear the washing of the sea. We pause and inhale the old, familiar scent of forest growing. Remember this, my love, how you see from the inside when the way is unlit, how the world blooms and dies and carries on. Last year's seeds swell in the damp earth.
I would like to say that that's a perfect example of how much the whole climate change issue awareness dynamic impacts every aspect of how we live a life.
Mm-hmm.
A reminder of that, a reminder of that.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. Every day when I walk to the ferry and I stop and I look at the sea, and depending on the tide, it's different every day, of course, but that whole concept of what is changing is there every single time.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think that is a really beautiful way to engage yourself in the beauty of what's happening, but also understanding it and trying to come to some
Right.
level of terminology and living with that. Yeah, I think we're all, it sounds to me like all of us are doing that.
Yes.
The mind has to expand
Mhm.
so much more than when I was 20, 50, 60 even, to hold so much more complexity, beauty, the love, the loss, the threat, the hope, the despair. You know, it's not one thing, it's everything.
Mm.
And language can help you hold that. One, you can write it and leave it there and walk away from it. I think somebody was talking about making something and just the focus on that thing that you're making. I think it was you, Marjorie, who were talking about that. The focus on that allows you to be present in a way that if you hold all of that, it gets overwhelming.
Mhm. Right.
And I'll just say too that, when we're talking about making and those kinds of things, what happens for me in the artwork also is that I don't normally make with new materials. I'm constantly making with the old. I'm also constantly making with the found. So there's that sense of using what's already there and what's available when you make the imagery, which is also another way of paying attention to the climate and the environment and all of those kinds of things, like with your flying, Kathleen, and not eating meat for a year, and then you can handle all of that. So there's that. And I also want to say that, Jerry, I think you had another poem, did you say too?
I do have another poem. I also wanted to add, you were talking about making with recycling stuff to make art. That's what I do too. My medium is collage, mostly collage mixed media, and I rip things up and reuse, and the more the better, and that's something that I don't think about.
No.
That's just what I do.
Mhm.
Yeah, I had another poem about another turtle, and this is a poem I wrote for the Writing the Land project in 2022. And it was right here in South Portland, the Dow Woods, it just up the street. And it's a little land trust tract with that's nature, you know, and South Portland is not all nature, that's for sure. So another turtle. And you may know that there's a creation myth that has the turtle as the earth, right? So creation story, Dow Woods 2022. Blanding's turtle, small armored mother, lays eggs near blacktop where humans leave bitter and unbreakable cup lids, wrappings, all manner of plastic, their words and noise and taking. Turtle makes her nest low down and solid, goes about what she goes about, hibernates, basks, estivates, in the duff, the dirt, the welcome damp. Her natural span, 70 years. She goes on as long as she can, the earth balanced as always on her back.
Thank you.
Makes us love turtles more. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I have not a poem of mine. In fact, I haven't been able to write a poem. I've been only able to write very lyrical essays that I've told you about that are in the Substack. I can't write a poem anymore. That's been a real change for me since in the last 4 years.
Could I just say, Kathleen, that I've been on your Substack and I've read your essays and they are beautiful.
Oh,
They are just beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
They're very lyrical and poetic.
Yeah, they are lyrical, yes, but I couldn't make a poem if my life depended on it, which is just this. I don't know if that's ever happened to any of you, that what you've been able to do for, a while, you suddenly can't do. But thank you. But I would like to read a poem of Leonora Hildebrandt. I think you all know Leonora, and she's was in the book as well, and she reads my Substack. And I was writing the Substack about the idea that there was just what I've noticed is that there's a lack of urgency, that people are beginning to deal with the climate crisis as a kind of ordinary thing. I went to a presentation that happened in Freeport given by some people from the Gulf of Maine, and they were talking about sea level rise as if it were, talking about a warm day at the beach. I mean, it was terrifying. And I've been reading other people talking about how the way people are coping now is they're making it too normal. So anyway, in response to one of my Substack essays, Leonora wrote a poem. So I want to read you Leonora's poem. It's really quite beautiful. It's called It's in the Air. And the "it's" refers to essentially to the buildup of carbon, so you don't have to figure it out. It's in the air, finer than dust, denser than smoke. We move our beach chairs to higher ground for a deeper breath, adaptation, mitigation. It dissipates into borderlands, a stranger's lungs, the thinning heft of forest. Leisurely, we discuss the animated climate graphs, bright circles that crazily flit and expand. It's in the air. It spills from the highest mountains, invades the finest capillaries. We might have known it, life, a butterfly's journey, a sunlit patch of land. It's in the air, the wind's eventful, awesome equilibrium. That's it. The contradiction between what's in the air and how we're moving our beach chairs up the beach and making it normal. And so, anyway, I don't know if any of you experience that as well, that there's a kind of normalizing of what's going on.
I think there's a normalizing of many things that are going on. Yes,
Yeah,
I witness that every day.
yeah,
And yet we have to find that balance where we continue to live, to show up, to move on, to fall in love, to be able to deal with losses and grief, and all of that, and process these bigger, more dynamic, horrible, distressing.
right.
As I said before, I've been accused of being a Pollyanna, but I don't sound quite so Pollyanna-ish sometimes anymore, and people have to readjust around me for a heartbeat. Yeah.
Right. But you feel everything intensely,
Yes.
Annalise. You feel the love, you feel the grief, you feel the fear, you feel it, you feel it all. And that what if I put my therapist hat on, if we start really denying the fear and the grief, we're also going to really damp down our love and our passion for things.
Yeah.
So I think that being able to feel the grief of what we love that we're losing is also a way. Without that, where if we don't do that, we're going to start leveling off.
Yes.
Not do
I think there's something else, a point I wanted to make. And Kara, I'm very happy that you're here with us. You're a different generation, and I'm glad that you led off talking about being a mom of younger kids. I wanted to tap into that because it was something that really helps me is that my daughter, well, both my kids, my son works in remediation as a chemical engineer. My daughter works for the Environmental Defense Fund. And just knowing her, never mind being her mom, just knowing her gives me such incredible hope, because she's doing this work, this incredible work that is about climate change, and everything, every aspect of it you could imagine. It's not like I feel like she's doing the work so I don't have to. It just makes me feel like I'm part of the conversation. And I think that intergenerational work is really, really important. So thank you.
Yes. I saw something dropped in the chat just briefly. It swished across my screen where somebody was saying, could we read something? So I was wondering if anybody, we're coming upon 7:55 now, and I'm wondering whether any one of us has just even something brief additionally that they'd like to read, or so we could kind of go out on that also.
I have a very short thing I could read about my own work.
Fabulous.
So I could do that.
Great.
Okay. So when I was thinking about this, I thought back to the piece that is in Dangerous New World, which is a painting that I did in the 1980s. It's a crazy polar bear on an ice cap and dressed in weird clothing. I was very much into animistic, wild kind of fantasy animal paintings in those years. And when we showed that work in 2019 at the Jewish Museum, I had some writing done about it. And in many ways, that whole series of paintings felt very prescient to me, because in 1982, yes, climate change was happening, but it was not really in our lexicon. We were not discussing it like we began to 10 years ago. Anyway, it just occurred to me that, well, so how did I get from there to where I am now? And I think what has happened by living out here and coming back to Maine, I started to see the environment in a very different way than I did when I lived here previously. So I just wrote this brief thing, and I said, the intent of this work is not necessarily to preach to the viewer, but to engage in a conversation about how we as humans view not just the large picture of the effects of climate change, but how we see the minutiae of what is at our feet. Close observation can be a wealth of knowledge. And I think that kind of goes along with what Kara was talking about, how you deal with your kids in the woods and on the shore. Yeah, all of you, really.
Thank you. I'll read just the absolute end of my essay that is also in A Dangerous New World. It's a very long, well, it's a prose poem more than an essay. And I'll just read the end of it. Kathleen, did you have something to read, else to read?
Nope.
Okay, so
Thank you.
just so we can kind of go out with a little bit of reading, and any questions that people have, they should feel free to ask also. So the end of this reads, I am not a doom talker. I'm a dancer and laugher and hard worker, a saver, a lover, naked and sincere. I'm a listener. I hear larvae and bubbles, rain splatting on the cracked asphalt, tree rings, coral reefs, the glitter of light in the night, gases and carbons and data body data, sedimentary rock layers, wind folding millions of minute adaptations, the puncture of seeds, disease, the rumble of the refrigerator, 413 billion tons of disappeared ice inching up the sea. Oh, we humans, arrogance and heart, alive to chance, alive, still alive.
Beautiful.
And I don't know whether people out there in the audience have any questions. Do we have anything that's?
God knows if they want to stay another, or any, you know, it's
Any
almost,
longer than this?
it's almost 8 o'clock, right?
Yes.
They've been great to be here for this hour, but if there are, you know, 1 or 2 questions,
I've been monitoring the chat, just FYI. No, so far, no questions, lots of wonderful comments. We're getting up to an hour, so as much as I would love to stay on, I think it's time to say goodnight to Littorally Alive. This has been a very dynamic program, and I thank you all for coming. Any parting words before we sign off?
I just want to say that everybody needs to kind of take a look at this book, even if you don't ever buy it. No, I'm not supposed to say that, I know. But it's an absolutely beautiful publication. And I will say that about Littoral Books. Everything they put out there is just so beautifully done. And I'm grateful.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And thank you all for sharing your insights this evening. We will be back next month. And so look out for the email for the next Littorally Alive, and buy the book. I put the link in the chat, and it is available on the website. There are plenty of copies to go around. So thank you all, and good night.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for
Thank you,
coming.
everyone. Bye-bye.